I don't want to be too redundant about this and keep telling you, but I just wanted to remind you that if you've come in here and you've seen these videos on Day Tripper or Pretty Woman or anything like that, and you see that they're titled beginner lessons, and you think maybe they're not really for you, the whole point of this course has been to take you from the absolute beginner stages of not having played your guitar at all, up until the point that we're at now. I'm not just putting out videos with material that might be accessible to some level of beginner. Rather, I'm teaching you from the start how to get to where we are now. So far, we've been learning the note names on your strings, how to play simple melodies, chord acquisition. As we're going along, we're figuring out the theory that's necessary at the time, picking up scales that work relative to the information we're learning and the skills we have already, and moving through the Hal Leonard book reading notes as well. Right now, we're actually doing everything I would be doing one-on-one with a private student. We're going through everything that guitar has to offer, looking at the theory and the techniques at the same time. Two things that haven't been happening, however, would be soloing, which I would love to be doing with a guitar student. Not maybe from day one, but definitely within the first couple of months. We've worked out the pentatonic, and I would be using that scale to learn how to improvise. I'm going to find a way to do that on here, but there are other YouTube channels that work much more specifically on solos, and not in the way that I would want to, which would be to introduce you one note at a time to the scale and improvising your way through it, gaining confidence with your own solos. The point there is not to learn classic solos or fancy licks, but just how to get around the scale and enjoy yourself, figuring out how to make your own music in it. It works beautifully one-on-one, but I'm still experimenting with how I want to do it here. And so now we're coming to the end of the note reading for the open position on the guitar. I've skipped a lot of material in the Hal Leonard book, not because it's irrelevant and not because I don't want to use it, but because I like to move around the book in a different way. We've jumped over several songs to look at the G major pentatonic songs, even if they come up later in the book where we're introducing rests or things like that, well before the book wants you to know that, but I want to tie all the pentatonic songs together. Likewise, with boogie bass, we learned the low G note on the 6th string and how to read that before we learned how to read the rest of the notes on the string. I'm still going to do that in a way. I'm not using page 24 where you learn the E string right now. We learned one note, the G, before, and now I want to learn the E and the F, even though we haven't used the page that teaches that. When you first start to learn how to read your notes, we used Jingle Bells. We learned this high E. We learned how to play the song by note name first and then learned how to read it. And we used a couple of these little mnemonic devices. A note in a space, like this high E, is found in the word face. The letters in the spaces are F-A-C-E. The notes on the lines, every good boy deserves fudge, E-G-B-D-F. Notice that we have a high F on this line, right beside a high E in the top space. We have a low E on the bottom line, right beside a low F in the bottom space. They've switched positions with each other. E in the top space, F in the bottom space. They're as far apart in spaces as possible. F on the top line, E on the bottom line. Again, as far apart as possible on the lines. So they occupy the same areas. If we flip this over, what looks like an E here would look like an F on the bottom. What looks like an E on the bottom would look like an F on top. They're inverses of each other in this sense. That will help us as we learn to read them lower or higher than this staff. The other thing we've learned is that if a note is on a line in one octave, it's on a space in the other, and vice versa. So F is on this top line. When we find it in the bottom space, we've gone down from that line through 4 spaces. Top space, second space from the top, third space from the top or second from the bottom, and the bottom space. 1, 2, 3, 4 moves down. We see the same thing with the E. It's in a space at first, goes down to a line, goes from the space to the second line from the top, third line from the top, second line from the bottom, and the bottom line. So we're switching from line to space and going down 4 units. We'll do the same thing now. That E is on the bottom line, and we'll go to a space. Well, the first space right under the line is right below E. It's a D note. When we put a ledger line and go under that, we're 2 notes lower, the B. When we have 2 ledger lines and go under that, we're 2 notes lower, the G, which you learned for boogie bass. And then 2 notes lower than that is the E. The same thing will occur with the F. It was on a line, goes down 4 spaces to the bottom space, Now it will go down 4 lines. The bottom line's E, first ledger line C, second ledger line is down 2 notes the A, third ledger line is the F. When I had to do reading on ledger lines, I found it very confusing. The number of ledger lines just looked infinite to me. They looked indistinguishable and there were so many of them. But when I started teaching it, it became much more clear that we can settle this down quite easily. One thing to do is to recognize that we're on the lowest E string. That's our lowest note. We have no other ledger lines to worry about, so we plant ourselves on the third. Rather than looking down below the staff at all these many ledger lines, I like to situate my eyes on that third ledger line. That's ground zero now. Third ledger line is the maximum, there's no more. If you realize that right away, you can kind of settle your brain down and take some of the worry out. You get to know exactly what you're dealing with. So the third ledger line gives us an F on the line and an E below it. E a little lower than F is under the line. F a little higher than E is on the line. When we jump up 4 and switch, E is on the line, F's in the space. When we jump up 4 and switch from line to space, then E is in the space and F is on the line. We can actually do the exact same thing going up above the staff as well. Since we've established that E and F are occupying the outside lines and spaces, then E and F below the staff will be the same distance as E and F above the staff. So if E goes from the bottom line down 3 ledger lines and into the space for the lowest E, and F goes down 4 lines to the third ledger line and it's on the line, then the same thing's going to happen at the top. Again, they're mirror images. F is in the bottom space, E's in the opposite top space. F's on 3 ledger lines below, the high E will be on 3 above. F here on the line looks like E on the bottom line. Then the way we got down 3 lines to the low E under the ledger line, then we'll go up 3 lines for the space of the F above the ledger line. We won't be reading these notes for some time. In fact, in Hal Leonard, we'll probably never see them, but it is nice to see, again, that inverse relationship. They're sort of mirror images of each other, and I always like to double check that to get a good sense of it. I think that one of the things that bothered me when I was reading ledger lines was how they all seem to blur together. There just seems to be so many ledger lines, and they seem to meld in with the normal staff lines. So if you see this, we've learned that on the staff, those 5 lines are very distinguishable. It's easy for us to see the middle of it, the second from the bottom, the second from the top. We can pick out from 5 things very well. When I get 8, when I count those ledger lines in there, then they can all become confused and blurred and we start having to count. So you want to separate your ideas of the normal staff portion to the ledger lines. So sometimes in practice, I like to separate those out. I've done flashcards at times and I find it quite handy to separate those ledger line notes completely from the staff, totally divorce them from it, so I can say what's under 3 ledger lines. You have to imagine that there's a staff up there and not imagine this line as the bottom line of the staff. These are the ledger lines. So then I'll flashcard these. You get used to seeing that E in isolation. That low note under the 3rd ledger line, remember I'm trying to remind you that's the lowest one, so we don't have to keep wondering, well, what's under 4 or what's under 5 and how do I keep them all separate? Just know that you've maximized it with that E under the 3rd ledger line. So you can run along something like this. Under the 3rd is E. On the 3rd is F. That's just a little higher. Under the 2nd is G. On the 2nd is A. E is the lowest, F's a little higher, G's a little higher than that, A's a little higher on the 2nd, B's a little higher than the A, C has the line through it. I also will try to separate them a little bit. They're not alone now, we still see the staff, but I try to get them so they're not quite so compressed and the lines aren't blurring together. So I drop these lines just a little extra. So again, there you see your 3 ledger lines. You can look at that 3 without looking at the staff. So 3 ledger lines is the E again. On the 3rd is F again. Under the 2nd, G. On the 2nd, A. Then the C with the line through it. As you know, I like to also add little visuals to these. They don't actually make a ton of sense every time, but I like to do it anyway. When you implant these visuals with people, they do tend to stick and remind you of what you're looking at, even if they don't actually make a ton of sense. There may not be a great reason for the visual, but as long as we've seen it a few times, we will be reminded. So on that line, what I like to do with this guy is I mark that off so it looks like a cat. Once again, in my own imagination, I can see the whiskers on that as that one line goes through there. Technically, you should be able to see that on any of them, but I just see it on that one easily. The E is a brilliant one. Obviously, with 3 ledger lines, we can connect them, and that's the letter E. So I'll do that for people when we're reading notes. If they have any trouble reading it, I'll just connect those 3 lines into an E. I've been pleasantly surprised that without my prompting, students have been able to see the letter F in the 3 ledger lines with the line through it. I'm not quite certain how this works for us, but it just does. People are able to look at these 2 lines as the portion of an F note, of the letter F. That's getting to be a little bit force fit. Probably my G is the worst of all, where I see those 2 ledger lines and the note under them wrapping around as though I'm doing a G. And the A looks like a block letter A to me. Again, none of those is really that particularly obvious, but if you do them a few times, the image will implant and you'll remember what you're looking at. So with that, I could move on to a song with only one of these notes, only the E note, just like we did with only the G in Boogie Bass, and learned how to read that all on its own. But instead, I'm going to flip to Deep Blue, and we'll just do a little bit of note reading there. Rather than take the time to write that one out, I'm just going to presume I'll get it on my screen well enough and have you read it. So you look at the first note. If we were sitting together, I'd wait and have you name these notes on your own and make sure you get them. So the first note in Deep Blue, I think this is your page 28, is under 3 ledger lines. If you can't get it, I'd remind you this is the lowest note you have, and you might remember that your lowest string is the E, or I would draw the little connector and show you that that's an E. Then what's the next note? Well, a little higher than E, it's on 3 ledger lines, it's the F. Then we have a rest. Then what? Another E and another F. And another E and another F. I might have you just go through the song and point out all the E's. As a very beginner looking at this for the first time, you don't know how many there are, so you'll read carefully looking for the 3 ledger lines. There's an E there, there's an E there, and another E. Then I could do it with the F's. We're looking for the note on the 3rd ledger line. There's one. You'll go through and find them all. After that, we could play the song. I would not have tipped you off too much yet as to what we're playing, but you would play E and then F. If you can rest where it says rest, that's great. You can do that by muting the guitar, touching this string with your palm of your right hand, and or loosening the left hand for a left hand mute. Another E and another F. And another E and another F. E, F, E, F. Usually about this time. You'll have figured out what you're looking at here. It's the theme from Jaws. Younger students aren't as familiar anymore with that movie, but most people still recognize it. So I'll still go back to this song as a warm-up over and over again. It's super easy to play, you're only distinguishing 2 notes, but visually try to use it to learn how to distinguish those notes. Make sure you're seeing the difference between E and F, and not just memorizing that you're playing open and 1st fret. We usually end up playing it with more of the rhythm of the song. What they've got here is 4 bars with the half note, and then 3 bars with quarter notes. So to count it out correctly, it's 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, rest. 1, 2, 3, rest. E to F, rest. E, F, E, F, E, F, E, F, E, F, E, F, E, E. Most people will play it more like they would hear the theme of Jaws. Longer gaps. And speeding up. That's completely permissible. Right now, we just want to make sure we're seeing E's and F's. I'm going to leave it there and do one more song with the low E note, and then we'll move on to chords and scales again in the next one. Thanks very much. See you guys later.